All right, welcome everybody. Hope you are all having a good day. For myself here in Seattle, this is early morning, so it's a good morning over here, and I hope you guys are having a good afternoon there. Welcome to our session on privacy in 2020, and why the proposed core privacy initiative is more important than ever in 2020. It should go without saying, but welcome to 2020. If you're anything like me, this is what your daily life feels like. The lady riding the ostrich is my 4-year-old running around the house. The one blowing the conch is my 6-year-old. And I'm trying to do business throughout the entire thing. So I get it. It's rough. Congratulations. You've made it to December. It's almost 2021. But in that, it's a stressful time for everyone. We all understand that. And we're all here for each other as a community to support each other. And so it's a stressful time for everyone, and the internet isn't helping. If we've seen anything from 2020, it's that we've seen an increase in bad actors and bad faith actions online. We've seen an increase in misinformation and hacking and ransomware. And to go back to a quote that Dries put out in an article, actually a year ago, it says, "The internet's become a dark place, and I want the old one back." And a lot of us, I consider myself an old timer now. A lot of us old timers on the web feel this way. The web has become something that it wasn't before. It's not the chat rooms, and it's not the message boards and fun and games that it used to be. It's become a fairly dark place. And 2020 has just exacerbated that, right? It's become even more so. And one of the things that COVID-19 in 2020 has done is it's been a once in a generation catalyst for technology adoption. Suddenly we're all forced onto virtual platforms. I would love to be standing in front of you in Barcelona, but unfortunately I'm in a room in Gig Harbor, Washington, speaking over Zoom to an audience across the world, and your daily life has been changed. You've had to adopt new technologies. And as a technologist and as a technology group, we're okay at that, right? We can pick up a new toy here, we can pick up a new program there, and it works for us. But for a large portion of the population, they've been forced into technology. And we can see this by this chart here. This is internet sales as a percentage of total retail sales in the UK. And if you look, this goes all the way back to 2006. And you see this nice steady growth, and we can see where, around the 2009, 2010 mobility starts kicking off, right? And so we start having mobile sales and the increase in e-commerce. But look what happens when we get to February, March, April, May of 2020. And in March, April, May of 2020, the internet sales in the UK grew more in 3 months than it did in the entire previous decade. Think about that. We did a decade's worth of growth in 3 months. Businesses that have never had to be online have been forced to be online in order to survive. And us as web builders and as technologists, we've been forced to keep up with that. And so a lot of the times, this is what we feel like. We feel like we're all just trying to stay afloat in the midst of all that 2020 is bringing to us personally, professionally, and then just as a world. We're all sitting here struggling, and we're trying to stay afloat. We're trying to adopt new technologies and keep going, right? And as our digital footprint grows, the amount of our personal data online grows with it. Again, for us being technologists, we're used to this, right? This is how we operate. And so for most of us, we live a pretty digital lifestyle. We connect in, we have smart speakers, we have everything throughout our lives that's connected. We're the tech nerds and the geeks of our friend groups and families. But as this massive onpouring of the population has grown online in the last 6 to 12 months, we've seen people putting more and more personal data out there as they start doing shopping, as they start registering for more sites, as businesses are having to transition things that used to be in person online. And so with that, our responsibility as technologists for properly handling all of this user data is growing with it in proportion to the growth of that usage. And this isn't a new concept for us, but what do we do as technologists? We sit here and continue our work while the fire is burning next to us, while we know that something should be done. And the hardest part is, are we expected to be legal experts? I don't know about you. I'm not a legal expert. I consider to be a privacy expert, but I'm not a legal expert. I get asked about, Schrems 2 and, GDPR and CCPA and all the different regulations that we're supposed to be under. And I don't know the intricacies of each law and each line, but I know the general sense of what they're trying to do, and we have to work towards them. But as a technologist, not only are we trying to stay afloat in 2020, not only are we trying to avoid COVID, now we're expected to be legal experts and try to, build privacy tools and build privacy into our websites as we're building them. And I want to talk about this idea of the uneducated developer. It's one that Heather Burns brought up in a well-written blog post called Check Your Privacy Privilege. And this is not written towards technologists or web builders. It's written towards academia and law. And this quote, wraps it up, and it says, it's very difficult for highly intelligent people working in law and academia, for whom their careers meant 3 or 4 years at a university, a year or 2 at graduate school, a full-time position in a professionally structured company with a clear career path, to understand that web development has none of that. Anybody can be a web developer, and that's the beauty of it, right? That's not to say we don't have our computer science courses and we don't have training for developing and being a developer and a computer scientist, but not everyone has to do that. Not everyone does it. In fact, I'm an uneducated developer. By train, I am a scientist. I went to school and studied science and graduated with a degree in molecular biology. That's what I did. So my education is nowhere near a developer, but I have a background in development, and I built that into a career in developing. And so what we end up seeing is in the technology world, it's kind of a badge of honor to be a dropout, frankly, to not be an educated developer. You look at some of the more successful, and I know there's some controversial figures on here that could be considered successful or not successful, but in technology, to build the big company, to build the life-changing, the world-altering technology, sometimes that comes from college dropouts, right? We have this idea of move fast, break things, ready, fire, aim. Here's to the crazy ones, right? It's encouraged to be norm breaking, to break outside of what everyone expects you to be. And for academia and law, they can't grasp that because they live in a very structured and rigid career path that allows them their career growth. And so most people building the web have no formal training. Some are brilliant dropouts, don't get me wrong. But many of us, myself included, are on their second, third, 10th career, right? They might have been a writer, auto mechanic, a nurse, whatever it is. We have an influx of developers from a wide variety of backgrounds, and that's a good thing. We should not discredit that. However, that lack of education, it doesn't mean a lack of intelligence. Like I said, it's a broad base that people are pulling from, but it means a lack of formal training. So none of us have gone to school to learn this is how you build a website, and this is what you should do when you have certain data, right? A lot of the times I've seen websites that I've worked on, and they're collecting data, credit card information, credit, CVCs and social security numbers. I've seen it all. And it's not because the developer was malicious. They just didn't know, right? There was nothing that told them, oh, you should not do this, right? As a career and as you go through your career, you learn that and you make your mistakes, but there's no formal training for that. And until recently, this is starting to change, but involvement in tech communities has been a privilege for that reason. Because if you're not getting a formal education in it and you're not going through that formal education, you're having to spend nights weekends. You're sometimes unpaid or underpaid. You're going to code camps. You're doing whatever you can to learn how to code on your own. And that comes from a place of privilege of being able to have that time. And Dries has addressed this in the open source community, that contribution is a privilege. And we need to work at ways to make it not so. And so because of that, because none of us have this formal training, what we get into with legal, and this is partly drawn from a presentation that I gave to a group of lawyers earlier this summer, in trying to understand how do laws and technology coincide. And a lot of the times the legal, whether it be lawyers or politicians and technologists, are at opposition to each other, when in reality we should be working with each other. And so, you know, as developers, we like to use cause and effect, this and that. So I structured it in such a way. The cause, legislation is vaguely written on purpose. If you actually read GDPR or CCPA or any of the other proposed or enacted regulations around privacy, or just legislation in general, a lot of the times it's vaguely written. And this is on purpose. This isn't by accident. It's because, A, you never back a lawyer, or worse, a politician, into a corner. You don't want to get them so focused on a single word, because in law, a single word can flip from a yes to a no, or a good hearing to a bad hearing, or a good outcome to a bad outcome. So they're broad and vague on purpose. And it's much, much easier to clarify what's going on in the law in the courtroom than it is in the halls of power, where you have to negotiate with other parties, with other people. It becomes easier just to say, let's just deal with it in the courts, right? And it's also a long process. And we've seen this here in the US, is that it can take years and years and years to pass wide-ranging legislation, especially around privacy. It looks like we're starting to get some movement on that, which is great, but it's been a year's process in the making. And so throughout those years, it can take many forms. And so the effect of that is that for lawyers, they're boldly going where no one's gone before. They're trying to minimize the risk for their clients, for their firms, for themselves. They don't want to be liable, right? So they're as a profession, they are supposed to minimize risk. And so what they do is they end up creating policy internally to their organization, whatever that organization may be, to comply with vaguely written law without fully understanding the technology. And I've had that happen. I've had lawyers come to me while we're working on a project and say, you need to do this. And I had to go back to them and say, that's not possible. Not only is it not possible, it's not even capable with the technology that we have. And if it were, we would be doing basically hacking your clients. So we can't do that. But they didn't understand that technology, the technology that we're working in. And so not only are they having to kind of work in the dark with technology that they don't understand and vaguely written law, a lot of the law is written, again, because it takes years to process, years behind. And so because of that, you have the lawyers are trying to apply old legal standards to new technology. And we're seeing this come up with more recently, a lot of the debate around Section 230 in the U.S. and what is the freedom of speech and press, and how do companies who are publishing online have freedom and liability release from what's published on their platforms. That's an ongoing legal debate that's happening from law that was written before the technologies that they're being applied to were even conceived of. And on the opposite side, as technologists, we live in a world of certainty. It's ones and zeros, bits and bytes, on and off, this then that, right? And so for us to look at vaguely written law, it just doesn't compute. We just don't understand what's going on. And so, the cause, building technology at scale is hard. What we do on a daily basis is very difficult. And it's been very interesting for me over my career to look back and think, how many people have interacted with the websites that I've built, with the technology that I've created, with that line of code? How many people have touched that line of code? And so you constantly, as you're building, are thinking of scale. What happens when 100 users becomes 100 million? and you're juggling the desires on a daily basis of design and product and executive and users, and that may be within a company, it's the same within a community. Within Drupal, we're always juggling the desires of multiple stakeholders. How do we build Drupal to be better? How do we build the community to address the next wave of technology, or counteract something that's going on in our world? And again, because of how broad this is, and we've seen from what's happening in the UK, the economy of scale on the web means that every small decision has real world implications, right? I've had websites where we made a bug or a mistake, and all of a sudden, 1 million people, 2 million people can't check out and purchase the thing that they want to purchase. That's real world implications. And it means real world dollars at the same time. And the effect of that, because we're living in this world of bits and bytes, ones and zeros, right? Not that we're all robots, but our brains are thinking like that on a constant basis. It's hard for us to break out of that world of certainty. And so we end up becoming what I call technical nihilists. We just say nothing matters because there is no meaning. There's if I can't understand it, then none of it exists, right? And so it can't be trusted. And I see this all the time in technology, is that, well, I just don't understand it, so I'm not even going to try, right? And I don't even want to try to build the tools for that because I know I'm going to do it wrong. And again, in our world of certainty, bits and bytes, ones and zeros, if it's not correct, it's wrong. And so that mistrust of the law equates to an apathy of even trying to comply with it. And as technologists, we would rather black out our websites in protest than roll up our sleeves and get dirty and get involved in the policy that's actually being done. Now that's starting to change. We're starting to see more of involvement of technology and technologists in the policymaking process. I believe as open source community members, we need to be involved more. That's where I'm working in my personal life. But we represent a broad section of the web, yet our voice in how that is regulated is not very large. And a lot of the times what we end up doing is we end up avoiding responsibility altogether by just avoiding the law, saying, if I can code my way around that, if I don't have to collect that piece of information, or if I change this a little bit there, maybe I don't have to worry about it. And we see this all the time in Drupal. And we've seen this not only in core, but in contrib. If you look at the official GDPR module, the number of installs that it has compared to the number of websites running in the EU is not proportionate. Why is that? Why is it that as a community, we are struggling to bring it all together and create the tools that we need to apply our technology in a regulated environment, which we all live in now, and growing so in 2020. And so to some extent, we all have become privacy nihilists. We've just said, none of this matters. I'm not going to deal with it. I don't want to touch it. And let's be honest, a new JavaScript library is much easier and much more fun because we like new toys. I'm the same way. It's much more fun and easy to wrap our heads around, a new JavaScript library or a new front end or a new back end component. But privacy, well, we'll do it, right? Or we don't know exactly, or again, we can't trust or we can't have certainty in what the law is going to say. So until we do, we can't build it. And so I would argue that we have an ethical argument for why we should care about privacy as a community, not just a legal liability, though there is some there. I would say as technologists, as the people who are building the tools that are building the web, it's our responsibility, it's our ethical responsibility to care about privacy, just like we care about accessibility and just like we care about security and everything else that goes into what we build. So, and don't get me wrong, we've already been dealing with this for a couple of years now, but with new regulations, new judgments, new court cases, everything is growing and changing and increasing in complexity. And so again, we're all just in the canoe trying to stay afloat. in all of these regulations saying, I don't understand. And I feel like the more I talk to the community about this, that's the general feeling is, man, this is just so broad. I can't wrap my head around it. I don't know how I can get, even try to get there. And at the same time, as we've seen, especially in 2020, the use of Drupal is increasing because, as the web grows and as technology is growing, the use of our platform as Drupal footprint is growing. And so the use in enterprise and education and government, three of the most regulated environments, that's where Drupal is growing the most. That's where Drupal is building towards and building features towards. There's a large footprint of Drupal within the government space, within higher education, within big businesses and large enterprises. And so as a community, we're building tools that are building these large platforms, but we're doing it in a way of giving the builders nothing to cover privacy. And we actually lag behind other CMSs. So WordPress has a core privacy team that has released features into core. Joomla does the same thing. And many of the proprietary non-open source CMSs also have privacy offerings. And so what we're running into, and I've seen this, is during the RFP process, we now have to kind of do this, well, we can do it, we can build it, here's how we would build it, but we don't have a one-line answer when it comes to privacy regulations. And that can and is starting to be weighed against Drupal as a project as we go out and try to win these projects. So we've proposed a core initiative to help deal with this. And a lot of the times I get asked, so what's in your core initiative proposal? The core initiative, when we start thinking about what is the core initiative, we need to start thinking about what's not in the core initiative first. And what's not in the core initiative is it's not guaranteed compliance. The number one thing that we do not want to try to even start with is saying, click this button, you're going to be compliant. Because then Drupal is going to have to understand Brexit. It's going to have to understand GDPR. It's going to have to understand, Safe Harbor and Schrems 2. It's going to have to understand CCPA. And, whenever the federal government gets its act together and we have a federal privacy thing over here in the US, they have to do that. It's going to be a never-ending battle. And so we cannot make compliance our goal. And likewise, compliance is such a low bar. You could trip over your shoelace and still be higher than compliant or than regulations, because regulatory compliance, again, is written years in the past. So what is applying to what we build now, we should be able to jump that from a regulatory hurdle perspective. And so what we need to do as a community in Drupal, and we've already started doing this myself and others from other projects, is saying as a Drupal community and as an open web community that runs now over half of the web runs on open source CMSs. Here is our baseline for what privacy is going to look like. Here's the common tools that you're going to have. Here is what you should expect as a builder and as a customer for those technologies. And so our goal in this core privacy initiative is to build tools for a better web and compliance in the process, right? We should always focus on what should we do ethically, responsibly for a better web, and then focus on the compliance piece second. And so for that, what's in the privacy initiative is we've talked with individuals inside the community and outside. And this is pulled from actually from WordPress. They do this, is that in WordPress, they have a core API for their plugins to declare data collection. And it's really nice. So if you install Google Analytics, you'll get a notification in the admin section saying, here are all your plugins and where they're collecting data and who they're sending it to. We need something like that. We need something to be able to say, this module is, it's putting a pixel on there, or it's screen scraping, or it's doing something, and identifying that. And so not only can you write better privacy policies, WordPress takes it a step further where you can click a button and it, spits out a pre-formed privacy policy page with each of the third parties from all of your plugins in it. I don't know if we want to go that far yet, because that took a team of lawyers having to write that. And again, you're kind of getting into the compliance thing, but having that visibility for site builders is critical, right? And it also means that as a project, we need to start looking at and penalizing folks that are collecting private data or are sending data to third parties and not telling people about it, right? And so that is one of the things that we need to do from a core API perspective, is to have some sort of declaration API to allow a module to say, I'm collecting data. Next, we need to have a framework for identifying, exporting, and erasing user information. This is, again, kind of modeled after what's in GDPR, but as you're seeing, GDPR kind of set the bar for a lot of other regulations. And again, it's another way for us to do what we need to do in building the tools that we need to build. So we need to be able to say to a user, if you want your information, here it is. And we need to be able to identify it. Where does it sit in the database in the system? And you want it erased? Great. Click this button, boom, it's off. And we also need a mechanism for the field APIs. So one of the nice things about Drupal is that it has a very structured database and it allows us to build these very complex data models with entities. It'd be great in the field API to say, this is a private, this field has private information on it, or could have private information on it. And so that gives you the ability to then say, okay, the right to access and the right to be forgotten, the exporting and erasing. We need to be able to say not only on the user, but where else in the system does data like that sit and how does it connect to each other? And then a basic form for users to interact with, just like we have user login and user passwords, having a end user request form for data deletion or data requests. And then last but not least, again, with it just being in a regulatory environment, having audit logs for all that, who clicked the field when, who exported, which requests are there, which ones have been dealt with. That's all great and that's needed as well. But as I've started thinking about this core initiative, and this core initiative has been in the process now for a few years, we've been proposing this. I started to think recently, why stop at an initiative? The current initiatives are focused primarily towards the future of the technology of Drupal, right? The JavaScript libraries, and Dries will have much more on that in his Dries note later. But why stop at an initiative? Why not have a core privacy team? And that core privacy team could help and work with the initiative, a core privacy initiative, to put these APIs and these features into core. But by definition, an initiative is a short-term, build it, end goal, plant the flag, we've done it, and then move on. Where a core privacy team says this is going to be an ongoing conversation. And not only that, that core privacy team would have the ability to work alongside the security team as they do module reviews, the Drupal Association, the community working group. And so as we start to look at what does privacy mean in Drupal, yes, we need privacy tools. We desperately need privacy tools. But we also need to work alongside all of the builders, all of the teams within Drupal, the entire community, to say, here are the privacy needs of our project, right? And a privacy team can provide feedback on future core initiatives in addition to current ones, which adheres to the best practice of privacy by design, right? And this goes back to the arguments that we get into with legal, where they come in storming in and saying, because of this regulation, you have to change this. No one likes to change their product, their feature, their code after they've perfected it, because it's just going to introduce bugs. Let's all be honest, right? And so because of that, we need to talk about privacy beforehand and say, hey, based on our core features and our core capabilities, you should tie into this. Or maybe you shouldn't think about collecting that information if you don't have to, because you're going to run into this. Having that core privacy team allows us to have that, that coverage across all of our initiatives to make sure that we're not just doing this as a one-time thing. And then also it provides extra help in the contributed module space and the contributed module review. That team can be involved in reviewing modules for data extraction and working with the security team and the module review team to identify and flag potential privacy issues within the contributed module library. Now, that's a great plan or where we want to go, but what's next? So how do we get there? And this has kind of been the rub lately is how do we've got these ideas, we've got a fully fledged proposal, we've got examples from other communities and other spaces. How do we bring that all together? Well, luckily, this is still an idea and an issue for Dries. I was posting about this recently on Twitter, and he replied back and he said, I'd still like to see a Drupal privacy initiative happen. The next best step is to find funding, which is easier said than done. And I agree. As I said, privacy is not really the sexiest thing out there. And so it's not just, money's not being thrown at it. However, I would say we can get involved as a community and as a group. And how can you specifically get involved? If you're at an organization, support financially. We've already had some organizations step up, both in the EU and the US, and say, I will support this financially. We've had people and organizations step up and say, I'll help organize this. We've actually had cross CMS groups and people outside of the Drupal community looking in, saying, you desperately need this help, I'll support you. So we're finding that support from around the community and external to the community. And that's another thing that I want to highlight is that when this initiative finally gets going, and if and when a core privacy team is formed, we need to have that team have representation from other groups. We need to have representation from other CMSs, from, I know it's a difficult thing for some of us to imagine, but we need to get WordPress in there. We need to get Joomla in there. We need to get folks that are building what we're building in there so we can cross-pollinate our ideas. We need to get lawyers. No, I'm probably the first person to ever say we need lawyers, but we need lawyers, right? We need legal experts in the room talking to us, with us, rather than after the fact, right? And so we need to find all these external experts to help support us. And we're already starting to get some of that momentum in that movement there. And so with that, we've got about 12 minutes left here. I want to open it up for some discussion. I'm happy to talk about if there are any ideas you may have for what that what that initiative or that team could do. If you want to get into policy wonk and try to pick my brain on different things, you can do that. But again, I'm not a lawyer, so my legal advice is only worth as much as you're paying for it. So, but with that, I want to open it up to discussion. There is the ability to do Q&A through the on air, so you can do it there, or you can do it in the chat. I've been watching that as we're going along here as well. So. So Nicholas has asked, are there early visions of the forms such a team would intervene on the contrib side? Do you have a sneak peek at these discussions? Do you know if tomorrow we would see a privacy coverage badge like security one? That's a good question. I think that that would take time, but I would love to see a privacy coverage badge, right? Depending on the module, but if your module is not collecting data in any way, and it's kind of a core framework, then you might not need it. But if you want to opt into privacy coverage or opt into that, that's great. Pulling from other projects in the WordPress project specifically, because they have a core privacy team, if a plugin is not declaring the exfiltration of data, they can get banned from the plugin library. And they do that because WordPress.org, which runs the plugins, also runs WordPress.com. And so those plugins are used in a commercial product, and they need to make sure that that coverage is there, right? And so all of the plugins, and they're going through in their reviews, if they find one, or if somebody reports to them a plugin that is violating the privacy policy or privacy rules of the project, they'll either work with the plugin maintainer to, if they don't know, or remove it. I see us doing something similar to that. So the early visions there would be just working alongside the review process, probably initially. We have a big contrib database already or project base already. So working through that's going to take time, but folks could opt into it and bring that review onto themselves. And we could start a queue for that as well. And then again, as a community-led team and movement, get more community members involved, just like the review process for modules has been. And that's gone through its iterations over the years as well. And so we have another question that, the first steps would be, what are the first steps? We need to know when the user consented, how they consented in a regulatory compliant way. That's a good point to bring up. The idea behind the initiative and the features that we've proposed in the initiative are, again, just the baseline tools to build compliance upon. And so this should not and will not take place of the GDPR module. There still will be a GDPR module. That GDPR module, in essence, already does a lot of the consent tracking, the field tracking, and some of that. That's already there. And so we would strip that off and bring that over. And I've already talked to the maintainers of those modules about it. And we bring that over into core. And then GDPR would be taking those tools and specifically applying them into GDPR. And that's where you can involve the lawyers and say, okay, now that we have these base tools, how do we build the house, right? Now that we have the raw material, how do we build the house? How do we comply with GDPR based on what we have? And the GDPR module does a great job at getting you towards compliance. And there's several companies out there now that are pushing that module forward more and more as GDPR is taking shape, and other regulations are coming on board as well. If you're interested in being involved, come talk to me. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Drupal.org. We have a privacy initiative in the core ideas track, if you will. So you can find it there. Post on that, and we can track you through the issue queue there if you want to be involved. But come talk to me. I'm here. I'm available. And as we start to have more and more momentum behind this, if you're an organization and you want to support financially or organizationally, talk to me as well, because those are the conversations I'm going to be having with Dries and others as we start to try and form what this initiative looks like and how we can get the ball rolling. I feel like, this has been a process years in the making, right? I feel like 2020 has been a catalyst for us, and as more and more focus is being put online and on data privacy, I feel like we're starting to gain that momentum, and it's just going to take a couple more dominoes to fall before we get there. All right, let's see if we have any other questions here. This is always fun. I feel like I'm in a Twitch stream right now where I can't really interact with you. And normally I can talk in the audience or whatever, but it feels very one-sided here. So yeah, I think as Ifrik was saying, we don't, as site builders, we don't understand the ins and outs of the code. And another thing that we end up seeing a lot of the times is that with privacy and more in security as well, as we try to bring new people into the community, right? Drupal is trying to lower the bar for adoption. As we try to do that, if we don't have the tools to keep folks private, their data private, we're exposing a new generation of technologists and site builders to the same hurdles that we've been tripping over ourselves, right? And so we can't expect the next generation, the next iteration of our community to know what privacy is and what it means. And so luckily there's support from outside the community. I have lawyers that I'm friends with, both professionally and personally, who've offered to be part of this. And so I think we can start gaining that knowledge as a community. Yeah, yeah. As Sylvian is pointing out here, I bring up WordPress not as a as a carrot or a stick, right? It's not a, we always want to kind of compare ourselves to other CMSs and whatnot, but there actually is a, what's been fun is I've been involved in both communities now for a couple of years, is there's kind of a desire to collaborate, right? There's been this, you know, push and pull that we've had with other communities, but there also is folks that are, you know, wanting to kind of cross-pollinate ideas and work across the lines. And I've tried to convince them, hey, Drupal actually is a really cool tool. You should use it. And likewise, on the Drupal side, I think a lot of us would benefit from going over to WordPress and using it sometimes. Yeah, so Nicholas, you have a good question about links in the community or outside for help for any dev wanting to get involved in privacy. In the community, we don't have much in terms of documentation or anything like that. I would highly, highly encourage everyone to go look up Heather Burns and her blog that she runs. She is she's not a lawyer, but she is a expert in the application of the law, if you will, and has been on the forefront of a lot of the privacy movement within the WordPress community and in the UK in general. And she has a wealth of information. And again, that's where I pulled the concept of the uneducated developer. Great ideas and concepts that she's bringing up and kind of the struggles as well as a privacy professional. So I highly recommend folks to go read her blog as well. All right, we've got, looks like we have 3 minutes left here. If anyone has any final questions or thoughts or comments. Otherwise, like I said, you can find me online on Twitter, on Drupal.org under Seller Door. I contribute to a few modules and projects. Again, there's a core privacy initiative page. I forgot to put the link in here, but that is online. You can search for it there and hop into the chat or the comments there, and you'll see that there already is some discussion around it and folks behind it. So with that as well, make sure that you join us on Friday talking about community and talking about working together as a community. Friday, traditionally, probably one of my more favorite mornings of DrupalCon is Contrib morning, and just getting together with everyone around the tables and working on things. Unfortunately, we have to do that virtually, but come join on Friday for that for those sprints. And then there are surveys to take at the end of the session, and the organization would love it if you do that. It helps them build a better program for the future, and it helps me understand how I can do better. So with that, I thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you online and working alongside you for a more private and better Drupal core.